Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Fallowfield. I'm a lecturer in the Department of Kinesiology at IUPUI in Indianapolis. And I'd like my colleagues to introduce themselves, please.
Hi, I'm Lisa Angermeyer, and I'm a clinical associate professor in the Department of Kinesiology. I also coordinate our first year experience in the School of Health and Human Sciences, and I have a fellowship at the campus level working with first year experience.
Hi, I'm Rachel Swinford, faculty in kinesiology, and I'm also co-director of the ePortfolio program at IUPUI in conjunction with Debbie H. Miner, who's here on this as well, and also a faculty fellow for our first year experience. Is Mark back yet?
He is not. I don't.
Okay.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, yes.
Wonderful.
He's tuning in, I think. Or no, maybe he's on mute. He's just holding. Okay.
All right. You want to introduce him then, Steve?
Sure. And Mark Hertel is the chair of Department of Kinesiology at IUPUI. He is doing part of his chair job right now, and he'll join us as soon as he can. So I'm sure he apologizes for not being able to be here right away. So we're going to talk about the impact of advising touch point on ePortfolios. And I want to give you just a quick background for IUPUI. We're a pretty large urban campus in downtown Indianapolis, over 27,000 students. We have 17 degree granting schools and over 1,300 plus community organizations engaged in research or service learning with IUPUI. So we're heavily involved. We're a combination of Purdue University and Indiana University as a collaboration. And IP is art and science based at the undergraduate level, but more STEM dominant at the graduate level. And then our doctoral level, we have high research activity, high community engagement.
We also wanted to give you a little context and information about our department. So our department has 3 majors. We have exercise science, fitness management and personal training, and physical education, teacher education. And we have a very student-centered, community-centered department. With many of our classes, we have service learning opportunities. And throughout our curriculum, we embed 9 high-impact practices. And we do so early and often. We start with the first year seminar where they do a global engagement activity all the way up and through their internship. So they have points in many classes at all levels. The other, I think, unique thing about our work is our team. So you've met the 3 of us, and having Mark as our department chair has been crucial on our team, because since he is the chair, he has helped us navigate some of the politics of this in our department and school. We also, unfortunately, did have an academic advisor, 2 different ones as part of our team. And that's one of the, I don't know if we're going to talk about that, but that's a challenge with turnover. So hopefully we'll be able to get somebody on our team again, but we've got a very diverse and great team.
So to learn a little bit more about you and find out what you would like to get from this session, we have 4 different questions listed here, and we would love for you to answer 1 or more of these questions. So take a minute and read through the questions and answer these, either unmute or in the chat, if you wouldn't mind just quickly answering one of these so we can learn either a little bit more about you, maybe what you're hoping to gain from the session, if you're part of an academic unit or if you're not part of an academic unit. So go ahead and take a minute to answer the question. I feel like I should be playing some elevator music in the background. So again, just choose 1 or more. We have Megan from Old Dominion. Director of ePortfolios Initiatives, teaches in English. Learn more about our experiences. Awesome. Maria, from a STEM-heavy institution. Limited ePortfolio in the department. Okay. Awesome. And they're part of the institute, part of an academic unit. Wonderful. Awesome. Got some Center for Teaching and Learning. All right, love it. So keep those coming in. That would be wonderful for us. And moving on to a little bit about our background.
Thanks, Rachel. I am about to send a link in the chat of the article you see in front of you, in case you'd like to dive in a little bit more about our journey. We started a journey back in 2016, and this documents that. And also when we reintroduced our ePortfolio through a grant back in 2018. So the main part of this will be helpful for some of you that I've seen in the chat about some of the concerns you have. We share openly about a lot of the mistakes that we made, which can be very helpful to a starting team like us. We didn't know what we didn't know, as everyone does, but it's very candid in some of the things to look out for. We'll talk in more depth about some of these parts in future slides coming up. But if you get a chance to read that, I think it will help, especially those teams that are just starting out or new, trying to integrate into their curriculum.
All right, so our initial strategy and objectives this was in 2016 when we first got an internal grant, as we looked at specifically career development and readiness for our majors. So it was very focused on their academic planning as far as courses. It was focused on what's their career action plan and a parallel plan B. And it was very focused on creating this product that they can then use to apply for jobs and internships in graduate schools. So our initial purpose was framework to assess career development and readiness. We were working with the ePortfolio office. The outcomes at the time was to create this ePortfolio focused on career, identify their personal and career goals that they updated regularly as those changed, and then graduate with this product professional ePortfolio that can be used for an internship. So this was what we initially started with. And then essentially we threw that all away. And we'll talk about why that was and then our new purpose.
Yeah, so several challenges that we ran into during this first phase was absolutely, as Rachel was saying, too much focus on the end product and not really looking at the process. We had at the time a very cumbersome platform that was sponsored by the university, TaskStream, and that was difficult for students to use. It was difficult for us to use, so that presented challenges. Also assuming that students understood what an ePortfolio was and understood the aspects of it. So many of them came to us not knowing anything, had never done an ePortfolio before. When we looked back at our initial assignments, they were very vague. We didn't have enough guidelines in those. And then we also didn't give them opportunities to give peer feedback to each other. And we didn't really spend time in the class. It really felt like it was an add-on. We did this in the first year seminar, was one of the classes, and it just felt like an add-on. It was just something we stuck on at the end, and we didn't really spend time. So we didn't really give it the resources that it needed and the support from peers and also the support from faculty. So Rachel's going to talk. We took some time off.
Yeah, so we took a year off and decided, let's refocus. Let's learn more about ePortfolio. And we decided to really focus on learning. So we did ongoing self and group of reflection via looking at articles that were out there. We did professional support meeting with Susan Kahn at IUPUI that gave us a lot of great support and ideas. We got feedback from our students, which is key and is a big part of our current program, which we'll talk about here in a minute. And then we did professional development via ABLE. So at the time, 2 of our team members, including Mark, went to ABLE, I believe it was in Seattle. And I remember him saying he had a very aha moment at that conference where he realized we're looking at ePortfolio through the wrong lens. We were looking at it as product when we needed to be looking at it as process. And we'll talk more about that. Steve.
Yes. Thank you, Rachel. So some of the lessons we've learned, and both Lisa and Rachel have pointed this out. Again, our primary focus was too much on product, and it makes sense, I think, early on in what we were trying to do, that you're thinking outward facing, career readiness, all those things. And those can be accomplished. But if you think of early adopters or the first year students, it's just not really that relevant at that point. So that's where we also talked about thinking about reflection, the process of learning, documenting the learning, and how they became more intrinsically motivated once they're tied to their ePortfolio and what they've learned, and they reflect on it. So that's what the big dynamic shift, as Rachel and Lisa talked about. It was not embedded within the course as it should have been. Again, I think Lisa said this, it was kind of end of the semester, standalone, too late. We now introduce it early. We revisit it often. And we give the students more time to develop those skills, especially when they're young adopters or first-time starters. Lack of planning and assessment tools, we developed that. Assessment rubrics that we use to help assess their reflection, but also some of the outward-facing parts of it too. And we didn't provide enough for the students for this to create their ePortfolios. We provide lots of resources now, examples, technical resources we have on campus as well with our ePortfolio Institute, who Rachel is there to help, and others. It's been great for that journey. And then finally, a big one that really helps, it's kind of light bulb moment for me in a large 200, sometimes 200 student class, peer review, student peer review. Students are not likely, or as likely, some, to reach out to you or other professionals as much as they will reach out to their peers. And once we started doing this and dedicated a little bit of time to this, it paid dividends with the students and their ePortfolio development. Next slide, please. So for something for you all. So several questions here, again, like the last one, if you can give us an idea on any of these. Number one, have any of you pumped the brakes on ePortfolio implementation? If so, why or why not? Anything like we've experienced? Number two, any interesting observations from our experience or connections? In the last one, what questions, comments, or thoughts do you have so far for us, if any? Take a little bit to either use the chat or unmute and talk to us, please.
I've been hearing a peer review a few times now. And do you give students, like what kind of support do you give them before they start doing a peer review? Do you give them some pretty detailed kind of rubric to work through? Or I can see the benefit, but I'm also like wondering how to really help them do it effectively instead of just, oh, that looks really nice. I teach writing, so I know a lot about peer review, but I also know there's good and there's bad.
Sure. And in the context, just we're on the same page, and Lisa and Rachel jump in if I'm taking this the wrong way. When we talk about peer review, it's not necessarily a proofreading type as much as suggestions. Sometimes it's technical aspects of helping, those that are struggling with the technical aspect. Students that are already built their ePortfolio started, that can help peer. And also maybe not seeing some things that they have mutual experiences in classes, service learning, other things that they do that they forgot to put in that represents their learning. Those are things that other peers can show, oh, did you see that we did this with the group? Those type of things. You asked about resources. We do a lot of prompts to help them get started. We also define what things like artifacts are and what they mean, what are examples of artifacts, different types of reflection, innovative ways of reflection, not just a written reflection. So we explore a lot of different tools to give them ahead of time before we even get to that peer review process. But Rachel and Lisa might add some more that we give the students.
Yeah, so the peer review, I've done it two different ways. I've done it in class where they actually trade laptops and look through the person's e-portfolio or send the link. And I've had them use the actual rubric that we're going to be using to grade. So it's a peer feedback via the rubric. I've also used more of an open-ended type of thing. And then if class time doesn't allow for that, I set up groups within our learning management system. We use Canvas and they get feedback that way. So when I use it, it's more towards the end of the semester when they're getting ready to turn in their final e-portfolio. So, yeah. And then we do have a few questions. Lisa, did you have anything to add to that? No. We have a few questions in the chat. How do you get faculty involved when it's not mandatory? That is our current challenge. So that's probably our ongoing challenge. And my to-do list for this fall is to meet individually with faculty. We've often mentioned the e-portfolio at department meetings, but my goal is to reach out individually to the faculty and let them know, did you know at the capstone course, 90% of the time students put your project and tell them about our e-portfolio, the why behind it, and help them realize that it oftentimes can replace a final project, or oftentimes they're already reflecting within that class. So just presenting it in a different way. I like to say that it makes grading a little bit more fun, things like that. So that's our goal, but currently that's our biggest challenge. So you have some people experiencing current things of the implementation. I thought I saw another question, but now I do not see it. So is the faculty question, experienced a lot of the same. How much did you struggle and the students struggle with the e-portfolio platform? Yeah, so when we used the TaskStream platform, it was miserable and we hated it. So basically, we are now e-portfolio agnostic, which I believe that term came from Megan Mize, who's on this call. They use that at Old Dominion. I believe that's where we heard that term from. So we actually allow students to choose the platform. They can use any platform they want to. We do have one that's supported by our UITS system at the university, but yeah. Let's see, what did I miss? Any other questions? And we'll talk more about that as far as giving students choice in their e-portfolio. All right, wonderful. So we will move on. I think it's all right.
So after we learned all those things through that first phase, we decided and got professional development. We kind of decided to do the relaunch. And some things that we kept in mind is, again, that is it the destination or the journey? And can it be both? So can it start off where you're really focusing on the reflective piece, but then in the end, if the student does want to create a portfolio, e-portfolio that they can take on job interviews, that's also possible. What is the whole purpose? What is the intended outcome for the e-portfolio? And then, as I think Steve and maybe both Rachel mentioned, the epiphany that Mark kind of started that, and then we all got on board with the idea that it's not it's the process, it's the reflection, it's them working through that and learning how to do that, become a reflective practitioner throughout this process that is really the key. And as Rachel just mentioned, with the platform being platform agnostic in our department, that it's student voice and choice, to give them the autonomy to choose which platform they want to use, what fits them best, what lets them be as creative as they want to be. And then also different forms of reflection. And we have a link. I don't know, Rachel, if you have the link to that article handy, or I can look for it. But this is another article that we wrote looking at different types of reflection, that it doesn't all have to be your typical written reflection. So we had already been incorporating many of these reflections into our first year seminar and other courses. So things like one of our advisors created what we call the Insta Snap a Tweet. So every day during our bridge program, students used to have to write like a couple pages in a reflection, and they hated that. We hated reading it. So the advisor came up with this, where the students would take pictures of something they're doing throughout the day and then create just a short sentence like you would see on, or short statement that you'd see on Twitter or Instagram. We also did 6-word reflections. We did small moment reflections. So just trying to have a variety of reflections for students that, again, gave them some variety, added some interest to their ePortfolio. So those were some of the things that we had in mind as we relaunched our ePortfolio project.
So what is our current strategy and objectives? So our new focus, it is no longer career focused. It's no longer this product that students are going to be creating. It is a reflective ePortfolio, and it is discovering the personal journey to becoming a reflective practitioner. To help students understand this, we introduce a journey map prior to ePortfolios, and we'll be talking about that tomorrow during, I believe, the first session of tomorrow. So we take 2 to 3 class periods, and we have students, we first have a discussion about what is reflection? What do you currently practice as far as reflection? They take a reflective practice self-assessment, and we introduce a journey map. And that is a assignment that came out of our participation in the AAC&U Institute on ePortfolios last year. It's wonderful. And with that, I think that helps students kind of see their past journey and how they got to where they are now. And then we introduce ePortfolio after that to let them know your ePortfolio is going to be this visual representation of your learning. And I love using analogies. One of my favorite analogies that I recently learned this summer was using an ePortfolio as your bedroom. So think about your bedroom as a child, think about your bedroom in college, think about your bedroom now and how that changes and how you choose to highlight different artifacts or knickknacks, pictures in your bedroom. Your ePortfolio is going to be the same. It's this living ePortfolio that changes over time, but it's telling your journey. And part of our student voice and student choice in ePortfolio is to choose the platform that makes sense for them. We emphasize that ePortfolio represents more than just you and your journey. It's you as a person, and it's your personality and those type of things. So we've done a better job, we believe, of introducing it in first year and then keep it woven more throughout, particularly here with this academic advising. And then our current main student outcome is to teach the importance of self-reflection and instill the skills necessary to become that reflective practitioner, which we know is important in almost any field, specifically a health and wellness related field.
Thanks, Rachel. The problem, you mentioned it earlier, it always will be, but I have to say, at least anecdotally, and we're also measuring this, student buy-in and engagement and ownership. We just completed the year 4 of our relaunch from 2018, and it's still an ongoing challenge. I believe now that we have students that started it and we see in their capstone now have taken it all the way through the curriculum, we're seeing more intrinsic motivation to have ownership over it. So I think if you're just starting out, know that it can get better, and you continue to try to work on that. But I do see that it's improving. In 2021, our team participated in the AAC&U Institute on ePortfolios to tackle the challenge of student buy-in. So we had 2 projects that we tackled at the Institute, and one mentioned using journey mapping to introduce ePortfolios. And tomorrow we will dive into examples and do other things to show you what journey mapping is if you haven't used it, and some resources for you on that. I believe that's at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for wherever you are in the world. And then we also added an advising touch point to discuss and review the student's e-portfolio, because when we started, we kind of had bookends, first year experiences, my introduction course, the capstone, but not a lot in between. And advising allows, and someone else also to touch point besides just an instructor. So another touch point we felt like will help continue, as Rachel said, weave it through the curriculum.
Hey, everybody. First of all, I'd like to apologize to my teammates. I stepped back, and my name is Mark Ertel. I'm coming in cold a little bit. I was here on time, but had to deal with something. So I think where we're at now, I just caught the tail end of that. And I think we're going to, this idea is addressing how we can make this continuous through the curriculum for our students. We did a really great job on the front end. We did a really great job on the back end. How are ways that we can infuse the e-portfolio with different elements in those middles, maybe sophomore 200, 300 level years? We were sitting around looking at this, and as we were mapping it out, I think we all had a collective epiphany that we have something at our fingertips right away that our students intersect with, and that's that second year advising. So I think at this point we looped in our at that time director of the Office of Student Engagement and Success, who then linked us in with our departmental advisor, which made perfect sense. We started talking about would it be too much of a load? How could they weave it in an efficacious manner that validated to the student it was important, but didn't overwhelm the advising session that they were coming into. And I think we landed on this really advising touch point. I'm sure the context was presented beforehand. Of course, as fate has it, our all-star advisor who started with this, embedded it so well and eloquently, moved on to a different position within the campus university. So we're kind of probably going to struggle a little bit to get that on board. But the essence was increasing a touch point to make it consistent throughout. So a student didn't see it heavily at the first year, then it goes dark for 2 years, then it gets represented again at the senior year. And we found that the advising sophomore level advising touch point was it. We're also working diligently to infuse it with other 200 and 300 level classes to fortify the consistent presence of this as a process for student growth and being a reflective practitioner toward that ultimate goal of the fourth year. And I would ask my colleagues, if I missed something on that or did not state something properly, please weigh in.
Nope, Mark, I think you got it all there. So this is just a slide giving an overview of that advising appointment. And there's a lot to get done, but we felt, and the advisors felt, that this was an important enough thing to add to it. So what they do during that appointment is check in with the student on the progress toward the completing degree requirements, update their individual plan for graduation, talk about any obstacles and how to overcome those, look at prerequisite lists so they don't have to add on time at the end of their journey, discuss post-graduation plans, and then looking at their e-portfolio and spending at least about 5 minutes looking at that, revisiting that, suggesting ideas of things to add to that. And then also there was, I think Rachel's going to talk about we had a survey that they actually filled out about their e-portfolio. And I think Rachel's going to talk about that.
Yeah, so whenever we talked with our academic advisor, we tried to figure out how can we add this to the appointment, just like Lisa said, and not overwhelm the appointment. So the goal was to talk about the e-portfolio and view it in about 5 minutes. So it's a short part of that 30-minute appointment. But the language or prompts that we kind of landed on to use during the meeting was that the advisor would mention to the student, this is a reminder that you've created an e-portfolio to capture your experiences and reflect on what they mean to you. So they asked them to go visit their first semester self through that e-portfolio that they created and look at what's the same as then, what's different, and how can they update it and reflect on where they are right now. So this would be about a year after they had completed their first year seminar e-portfolio. So the first touch point of creating an e-portfolio. What's nice is our academic advisor is actually part of that course. So they have that connection there that they actually are helping when students are creating that e-portfolio. I believe it's on to Steve.
Yes, thanks, Rachel. The follow-up after the advising appointment, students receive that survey following the visit, and there are 2 e-portfolio questions included. The quantitative question is, as a result of my sophomore advising meeting, I understand the purpose of my e-portfolio. And then the qualitative question is, how do you plan to engage with your e-portfolio in the next year? And we're currently gathering, or will be gathering, data on those 2 questions as we unfold this.
And what you're seeing right now are sample, obviously, comments. And it's important to note that we're trying to frame this again. I think this was probably conveyed fairly early on, the transition for our students to view this really as a journey for them in a process, that it's not automatically camera ready. So with these qualitative type responses, the idea is to foster or prompt in our students that they can engage with this sort of on their terms, and that we've coined this multiple times, that voice and choice. So it's not just them feeling like they have to placate us or an assignment, but it's about how they can know and understand it on their terms, so they'll keep it at their fingertips and utilize it moving forward as they matriculate through the degree. And I think these 2 responses reflect and illustrate that.
So we've mentioned several of the lessons that we've learned so far, but just to reiterate some, first of all, being clear about the benefit to the student. And again, I think that helps with the buy-in and helps them have ownership, giving them the several platforms to choose from. And that has been a cornerstone of our philosophy. Defining those terms. They don't come in necessarily knowing what those terms mean. And they also don't know what reflection is necessarily. So giving them clear examples of all of those so that they can learn and grow from that. Utilizing prompts is important. And that's, I think early on, we weren't as good at this. I think we've gotten better, but the prompts are really important to help get at what you want them to get at in terms of the reflection. Providing examples. And again, as we've done this more, it's been easier to provide those examples, but that is very helpful to the students to learn kind of what is expected. The student asking them for feedback. Again, early on, we didn't do that so much, but I think we've definitely gotten better at that. Because again, this is for them. This is for them and their reflection. Understanding the reflection and what that means and what it means to be a reflective practitioner, and how that can help them, not just with their academics, their personal journeys, their professional journeys, how important that is in life. And then just continuing to brainstorm ways to increase those touch points. So we did that with advising, but I think we can still continue to do that more. I'm thinking of other aspects of our curriculum that might fit nicely with this. So those are some of the big lessons that we've learned.
So with that, again, to turn it over to you all, we have several questions we would love to have you answer. Choose one or more. Have you experienced any similar challenge, specifically with student buy-in, engagement, and ownership? So remember, that was kind of the obstacle that we were trying to tackle with adding this academic advising touch point. Hearing about our program and what we're currently doing, are we overlooking anything? Do you have any suggestions or considerations for us from your experience? And then, do you incorporate the e-portfolio into academic advising? And we would love to hear other stories from that. And then maybe what's a takeaway? What's something you can use from our experience to help inform your own practice or others? And then also, if you have any questions, feel free, drop that in the chat, or you can unmute. Again, I feel like I need some elevator music right now.
I am Sarah Zerhelen. Sorry, I was eating lunch at the beginning of your session, so I turned my camera off. I really appreciated just hearing you describe this and getting to see some of your early results, because incorporating ePortfolio into the academic advising experience has been an argument that we've been trying. I'm at Appalachian State University, that we've tried to sort of make an argument for at various points. And it hasn't happened yet. But I think it would make the experience a lot more consistent for students. But one of the pushbacks has consistently been that it would add too much work for advisors. And I've never been an academic advisor, so I can't speak to their experience, but it seems to me that having a portfolio of student work to look at with the student would actually make their jobs easier. So I'm really curious, as you keep doing this work, if that is one of the outcomes also.
That's a great point, and sounds like a great potential study. And I will say that one thing that is made it a little bit easier, I would say, in our department is we have academic advisors in our specific school. So they work strictly with our students. I know some campuses don't have that. They have central advisors. So I think that may be a little bit more difficult, but definitely something to explore. I know in my experiences, if I'm writing a recommendation letter and I have an ePortfolio compared to a resume, that letter is so much more rich. So I would assume it would be something similar for an academic advisor. Great questions.
Hey, Rachel, as we're looking at questions, there's maybe in the chat, there was a couple about maybe student buy-in and something else. What I would address, and I'd like to address those indirectly. Okay, here we go. Terry, how do you sell e-portfolios from something different than a social media platform is beneficial? And also Kate, with that, I kind of backed into a really highly effective technique to use. In one of my classes, when had my students, I brought in a potential employer that they would eventually interview and work with, and off the cuff, she had stated, I want to be clear, I don't want you to bring in and drop off a portfolio or e-portfolio, but I sure want you to have something at the ready to show me part of your, and that right there, they were hanging on to every word. They're like, really? And she's like, yeah, if you drop one off, we're not going to thumb through it. But if you can use one in the interview process or your presentation to us as a prospective candidate or a prospective employee, that goes a long way. So they left, and we were able to debrief that. And that was all about the messenger. I could have said the same thing, but I would be biased as a faculty member. I bring someone from the outside, they say it as a prospective employer, and it changed the whole context. And she didn't say, oh, we harvest LinkedIn, we do this. No, it was like, we want to look at your dedicated work and your journey from the university through the form of an e-portfolio. So I'm not sure how generalizable that is, but that might give us a couple clues about how we may leverage other stakeholders to and I did not set that up. She just said that off the cuff. And I know I got lucky in that, but I think that'd be one way to think about it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I frame it to students that it's your academic showcase. So it's showcasing your professionalism, not necessarily your personal life. I know I said earlier, your ePortfolio represents you as a person, but you're adding your professional content, which is different. We've had many discussions about LinkedIn, though, if LinkedIn could serve as a ePortfolio. And I worked with one class that gave that as an option, and she had 3 students choose it. And that was because they felt comfortable putting that in-depth reflection out there for everybody, because oftentimes it's a little bit more than that. In looking at more questions in the chat asked about our academic advising caseload, I believe they have 300 students. Is that correct? Yep. So, yeah. Other questions in the chat. I know there were a couple more that came in. Some people talking about their own experiences, the problem of busy work. Oh, yes. One thing that I talk about and I know Steve does this as well in our senior capstone course, when we introduce, we don't introduce it because now students have it, but we talk about how this capstone ePortfolio replaced a 5-page paper, so we talk about how we're getting the same content, but it's in a different manner. Honors College and a number of programs incorporate ePortfolio into advising. Our honors program does the same. I'm currently working with them on that. Wonderful. Okay. Any other thoughts, questions? I'm trying to see if I missed any more.
Looks like there's a really a comment from Andrew Gay at SOU.
Oh, yes.
About kind of drive-by advisors, maybe doing drive-by or in and out academic advising rather than really engaging with students.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I still think it's a conversation, even if they can if they have an ePortfolio, just mention it during that might be something good.
If I can jump in for a minute, because part of my work is academic advising. I'm a faculty advisor, but I have a very reasonable caseload, but I have colleagues on campus who are professional advisors in their departments, and they have huge caseloads in engineering. So the students follow a flow chart, and they really don't see their advisor unless they have problems. But to flip it, I think like engaging with an ePortfolio and the benefit of it could be an argument for putting more resources into academic advising. I think there's great value there. I think we're doing our students a disservice when we don't adequately staff advising, but I just know from the advising world, that's always a big question. Just, if you don't have a reasonable caseload, it's really, really hard to have that kind of meaningful interaction with students that I think everybody in advising would agree is beneficial and important. So maybe this is a way to kind of make that argument if you're on the road towards ePortfolio, thinking about that as a possible resource. So
yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Maria. Yeah, I mean, the thing that runs through the thread, whether it's academic advising in time or other colleagues when we talk about buy-in, and I would have to say, honestly, at the beginning of this journey for me, having at times a very large introduction class, how am I going to assess this? It turned out to be the thing I look forward to assessing, because you have a rubric, you have something that's not labor intensive in doing. And for those peers, wherever they may be, that may be hesitant, anything's better than nothing to get them started. Help support them if you can, if you're really passionate about it. Get them involved however little they can get involved, because that helps. So it doesn't have to be an all or nothing proposition, I think, is what's worked for us and will continue to work.
Great. We have about 5 more minutes in this session, so please feel free to address any further questions, or if as presenters you have some final comments that you'd like to make. I'd like to make sure that we kind of end these on time so that you can get to the next thing, which is actually our student panel, which I'm quite excited about.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited for that student panel as well. I think Steve already mentioned this, but feel free to join us tomorrow. We'll be talking about that journey mapping assignment, and we'll share that assignment and do a little hands-on practice of a professional journey map. Have we seen any connection to retention increasing? So we just implemented this in the spring. So that's why we don't even have much data from that survey. So I don't believe we've seen anything on that. Mark might be able to answer that better than I.
No, I think that's accurate. Too early to tell. And plus with, everything, the situation we've all been enduring, that might not be a good barometer.
Mm-hmm. And then lastly, I would just pitch the idea, this implementation of academic advising came from that AAC&U Institute on ePortfolio. So if you have opportunity, definitely look into participating in that in the future. Thank you so much. We'll stick around if you have any other questions, but if not, we'll see you around.
Thank you all.